What is the legal basis for processing employee data under EU data protection law? A. Consent of the data subject. B. Legitimate interest of the employer. C. Performance of a contract. D. All of the above. Correct answer. D. All of the above. What must be considered when storing personnel records according to European data protection law? A. The size of the storage facility. B. The encryption method used. C. The duration and purpose of storage. D. The color of the storage units. Correct answer. C. The duration and purpose of storage. What is a key consideration in workplace monitoring and data loss prevention? A. Employee comfort. B. Balance between privacy and security. C. The brand of monitoring software. D. The cost of the monitoring systems. Correct answer. B. Balance between privacy and security. What role do EU Works Councils play in relation to data protection? A. Negotiating commercial contracts. B. Providing IT support. C. Representing employee interests in consultations on privacy matters. D. Conducting external audits. Correct answer. C. Representing employee interests in consultations on privacy matters. Which of the following is an essential component of whistleblowing systems under EU data protection law? A. Anonymity of whistleblowers. B. The whistleblower's department. C. The financial impact of the report. D. The whistleblower's motivation. Correct answer. A. Anonymity of whistleblowers. What is a consideration for bring your own device (BYOD) programs under EU data protection law? A. Device color. B. Personal use restrictions. C. The brand of the device, employee's device preference. Correct answer. B. Personal use restrictions. What is a concern for surveillance by public authorities under European data protection law? A. Enhancing surveillance techniques. B. Public popularity of surveillance measures. C. Compliance with privacy rights. D. Cost of surveillance technologies. Correct answer. C. Compliance with privacy rights. How does the interception of communications relate to data protection? A. It is always prohibited. B. It is allowed with the consent of all parties. C. It is a preferred method of data collection. D. It requires a judicial order. Correct answer. B. It is allowed with the consent of all parties. What guideline relates to the processing of personal data through video devices? A. Guidelines 2/2018. B. Guidelines 3/2019. C. Guidelines 4/2020. D. Guidelines 1/2017. Correct answer. B. Guidelines 3/2019. What is a significant consideration when using geolocation data under EU data protection law? A. The weather conditions when collecting data. B. The precision of the geolocation data. C. The popularity of the location. D. The color of the geolocation marker. Correct answer. B. The precision of the geolocation data. What is a key data protection concern with biometrics and facial recognition? A. The attractiveness of the subjects. B. The speed of processing. C. The uniqueness and sensitivity of the data. D. The brand of the camera used. Correct answer. C. The uniqueness and sensitivity of the data. What guideline addresses the targeting of social media users? A. Guidelines 8/2020. B. Guidelines 5/2019. C. Guidelines 7/2018. D. Guidelines 2/2017. Correct answer. A. Guidelines 8/2020. What is a primary consideration for cloud computing under EU data protection law? A. The color scheme of the user interface. B. Data sovereignty and location of data storage. C. The speed of the internet connection. D. The operating system used. Correct answer. B. Data sovereignty and location of data storage. Which of the following is a significant concern with web cookies under EU data protection law? A. The flavor of the cookies. B. User consent and transparency. C. The expiration date of the cookies. D. The number of cookies used. Correct answer. B. User consent and transparency. What ethical issue is associated with artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning? A. The programming language EDPB, bias and fairness. C. The color of the AI logo. D. The name of the AI system. Correct answer. B. Bias and fairness. What principle underlies the requirement for data minimization in EU data protection law? A. Collect as much data as possible. B. Store data indefinitely. C. Limit personal data collection to what is directly relevant and necessary. D. Encourage data sharing among businesses. Correct answer. C. Limit personal data collection to what is directly relevant and necessary. How does the concept of data portability benefit data subjects under GDPR? A. It allows data subjects to request more data from data controllers. B. It enables data subjects to transfer their personal data from one service provider to another. C. It permits data subjects to charge fees for their data. D. It encourages data subjects to store their data locally. Correct answer. B. It enables data subjects to transfer their personal data from one service provider to another. What constitutes a data breach under European data protection law? A. Any disagreement between data controllers and data processes. B. A temporary website downtime. C. Unauthorized access to or disclosure of personal data. D. Regular data maintenance activities. Correct answer. C. Unauthorized access to or disclosure of personal data. Which of the following scenarios requires a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, according to GDPR? A. Updating the company's employee handbook. B. Launching a new marketing campaign. Introducing a new system for processing sensitive personal data on a large-scaled, annual inventory of company assets. Correct answer. C. Introducing a new system for processing sensitive personal data on a large scale. Under GDPR, what rights does the right to erasure, right to be forgotten, not cover? A. Erasure of data that is no longer necessary in relation to the purposes for which they were collected. B. Erasure of data that the data subject has withdrawn consent for and there is no other legal ground for processing. C. Erasure of data when the data subject objects to the processing and there are overriding legitimate grounds for the processing. D. Erasure of data for compliance with a legal obligation in union or member state law. Correct answer. C. Erasure of data when the data subject objects to the processing and there are overriding legitimate grounds for the processing. What role does the Data Protection Officer, DPO, not play under GDPR? A. Providing advice on data protection impact assessments, DPIAs. B. Acting as a contact point for the supervisory authority. C. Making final decisions on data processing activities. D. Monitoring compliance with the GDPR. Correct answer. C. Making final decisions on data processing activities. What is the primary purpose of the European Data Protection Board, EDPB? A. To oversee the digital economy in the EU. B. To enforce cybersecurity measures across member states. C. To ensure consistent application of GDPR across the EU. D. To develop software for data protection compliance. Correct answer. C. To ensure consistent application of GDPR across the EU. Under GDPR, in what scenario is processing special categories of personal data permitted? A. When the data subject has made the data publicly available. B. For any marketing purpose without explicit consent. C. When processing is necessary for the provision of health services and the data subject is physically or legally incapable of giving consent. D. For unlimited profiling activities. Correct answer. C. When processing is necessary for the provision of health services and the data subject is physically or legally incapable of giving consent. How does GDPR define a child for the purposes of consent in relation to information society services? A. Anyone under the age of 16. B. Anyone under the age of 18. C. Anyone under the age of 21. D. Anyone under the age of 13. Correct answer. A. Anyone under the age of 16. What constitutes legitimate interest under GDPR as a legal basis for processing personal data? A. The interests of the data subject always override the interests of the data controller. B. Processing necessary for the purposes of the legitimate interests pursued by the data controller or a third party, except where such interests are overridden by the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject. C. Any commercial interest. D. The personal preference of the data controller. Correct answer. B. Processing necessary for the purposes of the legitimate interests pursued by the data controller or a third party, except where such interests are overridden by the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject. What is required for data processing to be considered fair under GDPR? A. Ensuring that data processing benefits the data controller exclusively. B. Processing data in a way that is transparent and respects the rights of the data subject. C. Prioritizing the interests of the public over the privacy of the data subject. D. Sharing personal data with as many third parties as possible without consent. Correct answer. B. Processing data in a way that is transparent and respects the rights of the data subject. Under GDPR, when is it mandatory to appoint a data protection officer, DPO? A. For all businesses operating within the EU. B. Only for public authorities, organizations that engage in large-scale systematic monitoring, or organizations that process sensitive personal data on a large scale. C. Solely for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. D. For companies that process personal data of EU citizens outside the EU. Correct answer. B. Only for public authorities, organizations that engage in large-scale systematic monitoring, or organizations that process sensitive personal data on a large scale. What triggers the need for a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, according to GDPR? A. Routine operational activities within a company. B. High-risk processing activities, such as large-scale processing of sensitive data or systematic monitoring of public areas. C. Small-scale processing of non-sensitive data. D. The annual review of a company's privacy policy. Correct answer. B. High-risk processing activities, such as large-scale processing of sensitive data or systematic monitoring of public areas. In the context of GDPR, what is the significance of the right to data portability? A. It allows data subjects to obtain and reuse their personal data across different services. B. It grants data subjects the right to have their data deleted upon request. C. It permits data controllers to transfer personal data without consent. D. It ensures unlimited storage of personal data by data controllers. Correct answer. A. It allows data subjects to obtain and reuse their personal data across different services. How does GDPR treat the transfer of personal data to countries outside the EU? A. Transfers are unrestricted under all circumstances. B. Transfers are allowed only if the receiving country ensures an adequate level of data protection or if specific safeguards are in place. C. Transfers are prohibited to countries outside the EU. D. Transfers require payment of a transfer fee to the EU. Correct answer. B. Transfers are allowed only if the receiving country ensures an adequate level of data protection or if specific safeguards are in place. What is the threshold for notifying the relevant supervisory authority of a data breach under GDPR? A. Any data breach, regardless of its severity. B. Only breaches that result in a financial loss. C. Breaches that are likely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. D. Breaches that have been publicly disclosed by the media. Correct answer. C. Breaches that are likely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. Under what condition can processing of genetic data, biometric data, or data concerning health be considered lawful under GDPR? A. When it is necessary for reasons of substantial public interest, on the basis of union or member state law. B. Whenever a data controller deems it necessary for research purposes. C. If the data subject has visited a healthcare facility, regardless of consent. D. For any insurance purposes without explicit consent. Correct answer. A. When it is necessary for reasons of substantial public interest, on the basis of union or member state law. What does the principle of accountability under GDPR entail for data controllers? A. They must be able to demonstrate compliance with all aspects of GDPR. B. They are only accountable for data breaches and nothing else. C. They need to document their processing activities once every 5 years. D. They should provide annual training on GDPR to employees. Correct answer. They must be able to demonstrate compliance with all aspects of GDPR. How does GDPR address automated decision-making, including profiling? A. It categorically prohibits all forms of automated decision-making and profiling. B. It allows unrestricted automated decision-making and profiling. C. It provides individuals with the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling, which produces legal effects concerning them or similarly significantly affects the MD. It mandates that automated decision-making can only be conducted by public authorities. Correct answer. C. It provides individuals with the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling, which produces legal effects concerning them or similarly significantly affects them.